Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being with us this afternoon at this press conference to present the preliminary statement of findings and conclusions by the international election observers for yesterday's second round of the Georgian presidential election. The press conference today will be carried out in English. We do have translation, though, into Georgian, so if you do need that, please grab a headset. They were at the doorway on your way in. Presenting our statement today will be Christian Vigenen, the Special Coordinator and leader of the short-term OSCE observer mission, followed by Laima Andrikine, head of the delegation from the European Parliament, Margareta Satterfeld, the head of the delegation from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Andrei Hunko, the head of the delegation from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and Ambassador Gert Hinrich Arens, the head of the Election Observation Mission from the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. We will have time for questions from journalists about the preliminary statement and the work of the mission after the presentation of the preliminary statement. So with no further ado, I'll pass the floor over to Mr. Vigenen.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guests, representatives of the media, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your interest in our preliminary report. I have had the honor of coordinating an international observation mission with all the organizations represented at this table on behalf of the OSCE Chairman in Office, Italian Foreign Minister Milanesi. Exactly a month ago, I shared the preliminary findings and conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission of the first round of the presidential election. Today, I'm here to present the preliminary findings and conclusions of the second round of the election. As always, Georgia was very hospitable, open and cooperative towards our observers. This particularly applies to the election administration, be it the Central Election Commission or lower level commissions. This is highly appreciated. I would like to thank all the men and women who spent numerous hours observing this election for their hard work, and everybody around the table for the excellent cooperation we enjoyed. In total, the OSCE experts deployed more than 200 observers on election day across Georgia. I would like to especially extend my thanks to Ambassador Gert Arens and his team at the ODIHR Election Observation Mission. Their support was indispensable throughout our mission. But these words of appreciation would not be complete without praising the dedication of thousands of polling station workers. We saw precinct election commissions, many of them made up of young people, who showed eagerness to stay engaged and actively execute their civil duty to serve their country during the long election day. I will now announce the condensed version of our conclusions. You will find our detailed observations and the full text of the conclusions in the written statement. The second round of Georgia's presidential election was competitive and candidates were able to campaign freely. However, one side enjoyed an undue advantage and the negative character of the campaign on both sides undermined the process. The election was well administered, yet the lack of regulation of key aspects of the second round did not provide legal certainty. The campaign was marred by harsh rhetoric. Increased misuse of administrative resources further blurred the line between party and state. Private media continued to demonstrate sharp polarization and clear bias, while the public broadcaster did not ensure editorial independence and impartiality. On election day, voters actively took part and the process was assessed positively, although the observed tracking of voters reinforced concerns about potential intimidation. This election was unique not only because it was held over 2 rounds, but also due to the fact that it is the last time that the people of Georgia elect their head of state through universal, equal, and direct suffrage by secret ballot before the entry into force of the reform of the electoral system in 2024. Yesterday, Georgian citizens made their choice. All the issues raised in our preliminary conclusions today and in the upcoming final report on the elections must be dealt with by authorities without delay. This particularly concerns revision of the rules on campaign financing, use of administrative resources, amendments to the legislation to ensure legal certainty of the whole process, and better regulation of media coverage in campaigns. I believe that we have a common goal to improve the electoral process, thus strengthening the democracy in this country. I hope that now, after months of tense campaigning and polarization of society, the newly elected president will spare no efforts in ensuring the unity of the nation. Finally, I would like to congratulate Salome Zurabishvili and wish her all the best, all the energy in the endeavors to protect the future of the country and to ensure a better life for all the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Andrikene.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I am very pleased to be back in Georgia for the second round with the European Parliament delegation. Our presence here for both rounds is a proof of our commitment to Georgian people and their democracy. We share the observations which have just been drawn and subscribe to the conclusions that are presented, and we are relieved to see that no major incidents were reported throughout election day. I would like, however, to underline that some of the elements that we had voiced following the first round are regrettably still relevant today. We are definitely concerned at seeing that the very negative campaign and the harsh accusations between the candidates already pointed out on the 28th of October have worsened. They have reached an unacceptable level which may jeopardize the consolidation of democracy in a country which we consider a frontrunner in our neighborhood. We still strongly believe in Georgia's European aspirations, but this electoral process was divisive and brought much antagonism in society. We really hope that the President of Georgia, who has been elected yesterday, will be willing and able to reconcile the nation in order to allow the country to address fully the many challenges it faces. On its path to the EU, Georgia needs a true democratic, non-confrontational dialogue between all actors in order to safeguard political stability. The fact that Georgian voters could not once more cast their ballot in the occupied territories of Abkhazia and Tskhinvali, South Ossetia, is also a matter of great concern. These citizens must not be forgotten and left to their own fate. We note that the choice of the date for the second round was not in the interest of all the voters and was not made in an inclusive manner, leading to suspicions that it could have been politically motivated. It is also with great surprise that we learned about the debt relief plan for 600,000 citizens to pay off their loans. Even though we understand this was the result of a long-standing process, the fact that such a major political and financial decision is announced a few days before a much disputed second round, and that it is made possible thanks to an entity owned by the chairperson of the ruling party, affected public perception in the voters' minds. This inevitably fueled legitimate suspicion about the real intention behind this measure. If we judge by the different pieces of legislation that regulate this electoral process, this large-scale action may be considered as vote buying, as mentioned in our joint statement. More clarity is therefore needed on this important matter. Such debt relief did not bring credit to these elections. On the contrary. We finally note with concern that cases of intimidation and pressure on voters that have been reported to us, these have to be inquired thoroughly. Furthermore, the mass text messages, and pre-recorded phone calls by the chairperson of Georgian Dream to all voters on election day, irrespective of whether in or out of the polling station, and inviting them to vote in favor of the candidate backed by his party, constitutes campaigning on E-Day, as we would not expect such methodology to be used to persuade voters in a genuine democratic process. We are disappointed. We remain, however, a committed friend of Georgia and hope that the recommendations issued at the end of this electoral process will be read in this light. On our end, the European Parliament will continue its efforts in observing and accompanying Georgia's democratic choices. Ladies and gentlemen, we wholeheartedly hope that the next time we observe elections, we will not witness the repetition of such a campaign, but one based on a genuine discussion between candidates on projects for Georgian society. This is definitely what citizens need and deserve. Thank you.
And thank you. And now please, Ms. Söderfeldt.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to say that the OSCE-PA, the Organization for Security and Cooperation Parliamentarian Assembly observation team here in Georgia during the second round of the presidential election consists of 11 observers from 8 participating states. As parliamentarians, we recognize the utmost importance of a democratic election, as we are the result of these elections, and our duty is to represent the people who elect us. It was important for us to come back to observe the second round of this year's presidential election, as it's the first time that the Georgian people elect its president by means of a runoff. It's also the last election in this procedure, as it's done this time. Thus, it's my privilege as the head of the OSCE-PA to deliver key assessments on behalf of the Assembly concerning the second round of the presidential election that was held yesterday. At the outset, I would like to say that it is the fourth time that I have observed elections in Georgia. Since 2008, I have seen the evolution of the electoral process. I would like to commend the Georgian people for once again expressing their commitment to democracy. Fundamental freedom were generally respected during the runoff campaign, and contestants were able to campaign freely. As it was the case during the first round, election day proceeded in an orderly manner despite a tense competitive environment. Opening, voting, conducting were assessed positively in almost all polling stations that our observers visit. The media environment, however, remained sharply polarized between the two rounds of the election. This unfortunately detracted from the core political message in the campaigns, contributing to a lack of qualitative information available to the population. In this runoff election, the Georgian people once again expressed its commitment to democracy by actively participating in the electoral process. Regrettable, the increased use of harsh, negative, and at times violent rhetoric significantly overshadowed the campaign and contributed to a rise in tension in the electoral environment between the two rounds. I would like to praise once again Georgia's vibrant civil society, which demonstrated great engagement during the election period and largely contributed to the transparency of the electoral process. However, while visiting polling station yesterday, I noticed that some of the representatives from the non-governmental organizations at the polling station didn't seem to have a clear understanding of the purpose of their presence there, and this is unfortunate. In addition, I have concerns about the misuse of administrative resources and tracking of voters observed during the election day. Looking forward, I encourage all political and electoral stakeholders to work together to continue building a prosperous, democratic, political and civil society and support the further strengthening of Georgia's democracy. Allow me to conclude by expressing my sincere gratitude to the people of Georgia for their warm welcome and cooperation during our presence here, both for the first and the second round of the election. I would also like to thank the authorities for inviting us as early as in May this year to observe the elections. And the OSCE Parliamentarian Assembly looks forward to a further constructive partnership with Georgia in the future. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
And thank you. And now please, Mr. Hunko.
Thank you very much. My name is Andre Hunko. I'm a member of the German Parliament, representing here the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. Dear ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank all the Georgian citizens we met at the polling stations yesterday for their warm and welcome and friendly cooperation throughout the day. I share the conclusions of the International Election Observation Mission presented by my colleague Christian Wegenin, Special Coordinator of the OSCE, and I take this opportunity to thank all my colleagues for their cooperation. The Assembly has observed all elections in Georgia since 1995. Yesterday, on polling day, we had observers deployed in different regions of Georgia, in Tbilisi and surrounding areas. We noted that voting was well organized. We noted as well the high presence of representatives of both candidates active close to polling stations. We noted that the second round confirmed concerns expressed by our delegation after the first round, in particular the surprisingly generous system of campaign and party expenditure from the state budget and private donators. And we noted the questionable timing just before the second round of the government's announcement of a debt relief operation for hundreds of thousands of electors financed by a private foundation affiliated to the ruling party's leader. Thus, the increasing role of money in politics in a country with a high level of poverty and without efficient control mechanisms did not contribute to public confidence in democratic elections. This is not only a Georgian problem, but should be dealt with. The Parliamentary Assembly and the Venice Commission hope to continue their close cooperation with Georgia to improve the electoral legal framework and its practical implementation. I will present our final report of the observation of the presidential election during the Assembly's January part session in 2019 in Strasbourg. Finally, I would like to congratulate the new president of Georgia, Ms. Zurabishvili, which is the first female president of your country. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you. And now please, Ambassador Arons.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Gerd Arons, and I'm the head of the really long-term ODIHR election observation mission. Sorry. We have come to Georgia as early as 18th of September, and we have been here ever since, observing both rounds of this presidential election. We, that means a core team of 14 members here in Tbilisi, and 22 long-term observers of all over the country. Around election day, we were joined by 135 ODIHR short-term observers and the 3 parliamentary delegations present at this table, forming the International Election Observation Mission. This international engagement documents a considerable interest of the international community in these elections. I take this opportunity to thank our parliamentary co-observers for an excellent cooperation which we had. During our extended stay here in Georgia, we have met several times with almost all important stakeholders and collected a host of observations. We are grateful for the continued very friendly reception given to us. This includes the election administration, the government, the candidates and their staff, the media, and the very lively civil society in this country. They all gave us the feeling that we were welcome. As I said in the press conference a month ago, Georgia has a good international standing as a democracy. The visible corresponding commitment shown by citizens and by voters was quite impressive. Yet, some campaigning members of the political class undermined the quality of the election by unnecessarily sharp confrontation, negative campaigning, and personal insults, instead of dealing with issues that are really important for Georgia, such as the rule of law and economic inequality. This bad practice was even worse than before the first round. Private media were largely partial and were in this partiality even joined by the public prosecutor. Our mission will stay in Georgia for another 11 days to deal with post-election developments and work out recommendations that we shall present together with the final report to be published in about 2 months' time. These recommendations will address a number of shortcomings identified in today's preliminary statement and which I will not elaborate on here further. For this purpose, we shall have further meetings with stakeholders while we are still here in order to make these recommendations as operational as possible. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you. And so we obviously understand how this works. We do have time now for questions from the media. I'll ask you to raise your hands. We'll work this way. I think go here and we'll be there. When you get the microphone, please, we'll go here. Just before asking your question, please, if you could give your name and the media outlet you represent.
We have live and let me ask you.
თუ ჩვენ ახლა პირდაპირ ეთერში
If you could just hold for 1 second while we scramble to get these on.
Yes.
And then we'll be set.
Yes. Yes, of course. დიდი მადლობა. მეორე ტური უკვე დასრულებულია, თუმცა მეორე ტურის წინ და მთელი დღის განმავლობაში ხმის მიცემის დღეს ჩვენ გვესმოდა განცხადებები, რომ ასეთი პოლარიზებული გარემო, ამ ტიპის დარღვევები, როგორც მეორე ტურის მიმდინარეობის
which were observed during the second tour and also during campaigning is unprecedented. This was the assessment from the local observers, NGOs, and the stakeholders and actors involved in the election. You mentioned the buying votes, relief of debts, intimidations,
ორგანიზაციები საუბრობდნენ ალბიპირადობის მოწმობების დაბეჭდვაზეც მეორე ტურის წინ. როგორ ფიქრობთ, რამდენად დიდი გავლენა მოახდინა ამ ყველაფერმა არჩევნების შედეგებზე და ამ პირობებში რამდენად შეიძლება ჩაითვალოს არჩევნების შედეგები ლეგიტიმურად? ევროპარლამენტის წარმომადგენელთანაც და ოდირის წარმომადგენელთანაც მეცნებე შეკითხვა და ვისაც სურვილი აქვს დიდი სიამოვნებით მოვისმენთ ყველა
representative and Odir, or whoever on the panel who wants to answer this.
Thank you very much for your question. I do not have with me our conclusions, our joint conclusions here, so I cannot quote what is in there, but you can easily find this. It's for your information. Very briefly, you have certain provisions in at least 2 very important documents in this country, and that is election code and the criminal code. And in those laws, you have very clear definition what is to be considered as the vote buying. So as far as I know, this case is already under investigation by the Prosecutor General's office. So, and I leave this to him. But of course, we will be monitoring the situation and waiting for the conclusions. Thank you.
mean, I'm sorry. We are in the election observation mission, and that means that we hold the practice of these elections against the commitments to which this party is a partner, in particular for us, the Copenhagen document. And this is in our preliminary statement. And we refrain from making very general statements of legitimizing an election or something like that. We cannot do that. We hold this against the commitments. And then there's, of course, the possibility that here in Georgia, the complaints procedure is being used, and so that in the end the courts decide whether a decision or a practice has been acceptable or not. Among our observations, we look, of course, at the practice, how the courts deal with these complaints, but this is too early to comment on now.
Thank you. Well, joining the statements made by my colleagues, I would like to once again underline that our goal here is to assess the process, campaign, election day. What I can say is that investigation is going on the number of cases that you mentioned. The definition of vote buying is quite extensive in the electoral and criminal code, but it is not the observation mission to decide. It is the court that has to pronounce itself was that a case of vote buying. In our statement, what we say there is that the situation with the debt relief, as we say, could amount to vote buying, but the final decision on that is not ours. What I would say on a personal basis, as my personal conclusion, looking at the results of the elections, the difference between the two candidates, it's large enough to make the conclusion that irregularities that we identify in our report did not affect the final outcome of these elections. But as I say, it's my personal position based on what I've seen before, during first and second round of the elections. Thank you.
Hello, hi. Reuters Caucasus Bureau, Margaret Antitse. Did I understand you correctly that you monitored the first round of the election and the second round? Did I understand you correctly that you didn't see any progress between these two rounds of the election? And also, I'd like to reiterate my question, which I asked at the previous press conference, whether all those irregularities which you observed during the election in Georgia may have any negative impact on Georgia's, well, as you, Mr. Aron, said, standing as a democracy and Georgia's further aspirations to join NATO and the EU. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks for the question. Thanks for the question. I will start to say what I observed, and it's what we also discussed in our team, and we share this opinion. It's that the rhetoric have been more harsh during the second round. We stated in the first round that we hoped that it would be more responsibility, a bit lower, not that harsh for the second round, but we haven't seen any tendency to that. It's the opposite. And when it comes to the membership of the European Union, Sweden is a member of the European country. And it was also Sweden, together with Poland, who once took the initiative for the Eastern Partnership. And Georgia is a member of the Eastern Partnership, and that is also supporting Georgia, both, of course, to develop its laws and the way the society works, but also, of course, to increase the trade and the contribution and the collaboration together with the European Union. And I hope that Georgia will continue to work forward to be a member of the European Union. Thank you very much.
If I, Ambassador Arens, you wanted to say something? Yeah.
Well,
Thank
you
you.
ask about progress from the first to the second round. Now, we have been here all the time. For us, this is, of course, one election. But when you look at the different sectors, the campaign has rather had a regress because the tone has become worse than before. In other aspects, there may have been some progress, but we look at this in the whole. And as I said in my contribution, when we do the final report, we will make recommendations, and we will discuss these recommendations here before leaving to see where further improvements could be made. But between the first and the second round, I do not see much progress.
I would support Ambassador Arens on his assessment. And from our perspective, looking from the European Parliament, as I said, Georgia is a front runner, speaking about our Eastern Partnership policy. And of course, this election is a litmus test for Georgia. We can be, happy with what we managed to achieve, association agreement and DCFTA and visa-free regime and many other things, but we are looking forward. And I was sorry, I was really sorry, sincerely sorry, seeing, methods used during this election campaign, especially before the second round. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to react to both questions concerning the legitimacy of the elections. I think I would like to underline what my colleague said. This is a question of the courts. There's as well the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg, where you can go for if the right of free and fair election is violated. I would like as well to underline from my personal view that maybe it affected the result, but not the outcome of the elections. Concerning the question of how is Georgia seen in the international community, I would say this is it's a political assessment, but I don't see that this election will damage the image of Georgia in general. And I think the picture from, if you compare the elections before and with the second round election, I think it's a mixed picture. What was mentioned in some aspects is progress, in some aspects especially in the campaign and the polarization and even hate speech, it is some regress, but I think now it should be necessary to overcome this situation.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions here, so first, yeah.
Associated Press, Sopiko Megrelice. So my question is very brief. Taking into consideration the shortcomings and the violations and concerns you have voiced today, did this election meet the democratic standards? Because this word democratic is missing from your preliminary report, unlike the other I've seen during the election. So did this election meet the democratic standards? Thank you.
I said before that we normally avoid such generalized statements. We hold the elections against a number of commitments. And you will, for example, from OSCE, never find a judgment saying these elections were free and fair or so. This is being used and can make sense in other contexts, but not in the context of a highly developed election observation, which says in the preliminary statement exactly what we feel, what has not been met by way of commitments. And I would not go beyond that.
All right, well, that would appear to be it for questions, I think. Thank the panel for the answers and for the questions from the journalists. Just before we leave today, to let you know that the preliminary statement we are presenting is available on your way out on the table there in both English and Georgian, along with the press release from today's press conference. And otherwise, on behalf of the panel, I think as well, I'd like to wish you a wonderful rest of the afternoon.